Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, September 1944. Hauptmann Erika Weber stood by the barracks window of the female prisoner enclosure, observing what seemed to be a series of military blunders playing out on the training ground beyond the fence. American soldiers were going through their drills with a relaxed efficiency that was a stark contrast to the strict precision she had seen in Wehrmacht training. "Look at them," she commented to Oberfeldwebel Monica Braun, pointing towards the American soldiers engaged in field exercises. "There are no synchronized movements, no parade ground exactness. They look like a group of farmers pretending to be soldiers." Monica came to the window, her expression critical as she, a veteran of 8 years in German signals intelligence, examined the scene. "Their formation discipline is appalling," she concurred. "In the Wehrmacht, such carelessness would lead to instant disciplinary action." The 42 German female prisoners at Fort Leavenworth came from various military backgrounds. Communications officers, medical staff, and administrative personnel, all captured during the Normandy campaign. Like Erika, most of them had been deeply ingrained with the belief in the superiority of the Wehrmacht and the military inferiority of the Allies. American success was often chalked up to their industrial might, rather than their military skill. "The Americans have won through sheer numbers and resources," Erika went on, echoing the propaganda she had absorbed during her service. "Not because they have superior soldiers or training. Just look at how they move. There is no coordination, no discipline. German soldiers would perform those same maneuvers with perfect unified precision." Through the fence they watched as American infantry practiced squad tactics in a nearby wooded area. The soldiers moved independently, not in a synchronized formation, using hand signals to communicate and making individual choices based on the terrain and the tactical situation. To Erika's Wehrmacht-trained eyes, it all appeared disorganized and inefficient. "Miss Weber," Sergeant Anderson called from the barracks doorway, using the respectful title that the American guards used even for their enemy prisoners. "Colonel Morrison would like to see you in the administration building. He wishes to discuss the prisoner work program." As Erika made her way across the compound towards the meeting, she passed close to the training field fence and could hear the American drill instructors coaching their soldiers through various combat scenarios. The training seemed to emphasize initiative, problem-solving, and adaptability over the rote memorization and synchronized movements that she associated with proper military discipline. "What a terrible training method," she muttered to herself. "No wonder they needed such an overwhelming material advantage to defeat us." Colonel Morrison's office provided a view of the main training facility, and through his windows Erika could see several different training exercises taking place. There were physical fitness drills, weapons practice, and tactical simulations, all carried out with the same casual efficiency that struck her Wehrmacht-trained sensibilities as unprofessional. "Miss Weber," Morrison said after she had taken a seat, "we are introducing a new program that will allow exemplary prisoners to observe our American military training. The objective is cultural education and a demonstration that our methods, while different from the German approach, are effective in their own way." "You want us to watch your training?" Erika could not conceal her skepticism. "To observe American soldiers who lack the discipline and precision that are the hallmarks of true military excellence?" Morrison's expression did not change, though a hint of something in his eyes suggested he had encountered similar attitudes before. "I want you to observe with an open mind and to draw your own conclusions based on what you see, rather than on your assumptions. You may be surprised by what you learn." The proposal seemed ludicrous, enemy prisoners critiquing the training methods of their captors. But Erika's background in intelligence made her curious about the American military's organization, even if she was already certain of the conclusions she would reach. German training produced superior soldiers. American success was a result of industrial capacity, not military competence, I will observe, she agreed, "though I expect my conclusions will only confirm what I already know about the comparative quality of our militaries." Morrison offered a slight smile. "Then you have nothing to lose by watching closely. The training observations will begin tomorrow morning at 0600 hours. As Erika went back to the barracks, she told the other prisoners about the training observation program. Their reactions were a mix of curiosity and scorn, but they all shared her fundamental belief that German military training was the epitome of martial excellence, while the American methods were an inferior substitute, made possible only by their industrial abundance. Tomorrow she would observe the American training and document its shortcomings for the detailed intelligence reports she continued to maintain, even in captivity. She never suspected that what she was about to witness would challenge every assumption she held about military effectiveness, training philosophy, and the relationship between discipline and success in combat. The pre-dawn sky was just beginning to lighten when Sergeant Anderson escorted Erica and 5 other German prisoners to an observation point overlooking Fort Leavenworth's main training facility. They had been provided with notebooks and were instructed to record anything they found noteworthy about the American military's methods, a request that Erica found to be either remarkably confident or incredibly foolish. The unit you will be observing today is completing its advanced infantry training, Anderson explained in his carefully spoken German. These soldiers will be deployed to the Pacific Theater in 6 weeks. Watch carefully and feel free to ask questions if you do not understand what you are seeing. As the sun rose, the American soldiers assembled with an efficiency that took Erica by surprise. It was not the rigid parade ground precision she was accustomed to seeing in a military formation, but a purposeful organization that suggested these men understood their roles and did not require constant supervision. "Do you notice anything unusual?" asked Captain Williams, the training oversight officer who had joined their observation group. "They are not standing at attention," Erica noted. "In the Wehrmacht, soldiers maintain a rigid posture during formation. Your men look very casual." "They are comfortable," Williams corrected her. "We do not waste energy on parade ground formalities during field training. These soldiers know why they are here and what is expected of them. We do not need to enforce discipline through a rigid posture. We have built it into their understanding of their purpose." The distinction seemed like a matter of semantics to Erica, but she made a note of the American approach to formation discipline. The real surprises, however, began when the training exercises started. The first drill was a squad-level tactical movement through varied terrain. Instead of moving in a synchronized formation, the American soldiers advanced independently, each man adapting his movement to the features of the terrain and taking up covering positions, all while maintaining the overall cohesion of the squad. To Erica's eyes, it appeared disorganized, but she also noticed that the squad was able to cover ground quickly while still providing mutual support. "Why do they not move together?" Monica asked, giving voice to the question that was on the minds of all the German observers. "In Wehrmacht training, the members of a squad advance in a coordinated formation." "Because the terrain is never uniform," Williams replied. "A rigid formation might look impressive on a parade ground, but it is tactically inefficient in actual combat. We train our soldiers to think independently while maintaining the integrity of their squad. Each man assesses his own position and movement based on the tactical situation." Over the next hour, Erica watched as the American training continued to defy her assumptions about proper military discipline. The soldiers were encouraged to question orders if they seemed tactically unwise. Junior enlisted men were making independent decisions during the simulated combat. The training placed a strong emphasis on problem-solving rather than on rote obedience. "This would never be allowed in the Wehrmacht," she told Williams during a break. "German military excellence is derived from perfect obedience to orders, synchronized execution, and an unquestioning acceptance of command authority." "And how has that worked out for you?" Williams asked quietly, gesturing towards the German prisoners who were observing the American training. "Your army prioritized obedience over initiative. Ours prioritizes the accomplishment of the mission over a rigid adherence to procedure. You are here as prisoners. Our soldiers are preparing for their next deployment. Those outcomes suggest something about the comparative effectiveness of our training methods." The observation stung more than Erica was willing to admit. She had been captured because her Wehrmacht unit had continued to follow obsolete orders, despite the changing tactical situation. The very rigid obedience that she had praised had led directly to her unit's destruction and her own capture. "Tomorrow," Williams continued, "you will observe the advanced tactics training where the soldiers will plan and execute complex operations with minimal supervision from their officers. I think you will find it to be quite educational." As they returned to the prisoner compound, Erica's mind was filled with uncomfortable questions. The American training looked undisciplined and casual, yet it clearly produced soldiers who were capable of complex, independent operations. The Wehrmacht's training emphasized synchronized precision and absolute obedience, Yet it had led Germany to defeat. Could it be that she had been wrong about what constituted superior military training? The thought felt like a betrayal, but the evidence was beginning to accumulate in a way that her intelligence background could not allow her to ignore. The second day of the training observations featured advanced tactical exercises, where the American soldiers planned and executed simulated combat operations with a level of independence that would have been unimaginable within the Wehrmacht's structure. Erika watched as a squad of 8 enlisted men, with no officers present, analyzed a tactical problem, devised a solution, and then implemented it with a coordinated efficiency that was nothing like the synchronized movements of the German military, yet still effectively achieved their mission objectives. "Where are the officers?" asked Lieutenant Bergman, a former Luftwaffe communications officer who had joined the observation group. "Who is in command of this operation?" "Sergeant Hayes is the squad leader," Captain Williams replied, pointing to an experienced non-commissioned officer who was consulting with his team rather than simply issuing orders. In the American military structure, sergeants are responsible for leading small unit operations. The officers provide the strategic direction, but we trust our sergeants to handle the tactical execution. "You allow enlisted men to make command decisions?" Erika's voice was filled with a disbelief that would have been entirely appropriate in the Wehrmacht, where the officer corps maintained a strict, hierarchical control, and enlisted men were expected to execute orders without question or initiative. "We do not just allow them to, we require it of them," Williams corrected her. "Combat is chaotic. Communications can fail. Officers can become casualties. The situation can change faster than commands can be transmitted. We train every soldier to think independently and to make tactical decisions. That way our units can remain effective even when the command structure is disrupted." As the exercise continued, Erika saw exactly what Williams meant. The American squad encountered an unexpected obstacle, an enemy position in an unanticipated location, and they immediately adapted their plan without waiting for instructions from a higher authority. The squad members communicated efficiently, adjusted their positions, and executed a modified tactic that neutralized the threat. The total time that elapsed from the identification of the problem to its resolution was a mere 4 minutes. In Wehrmacht training, Erika admitted reluctantly, encountering an unexpected situation would have required us to request new orders from the command authority. We would have reported the change in the situation and awaited further instructions. "And how long would that have taken?" Williams asked. 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the efficiency of the communication and the availability of the command. And in combat, that is often too long. By the time the new orders arrive, the situation has already changed again. Williams gestured toward the American squad, who were now consolidating their position after having successfully completed the exercise. "We train our soldiers to solve problems in real time because that is what combat demands. Your Wehrmacht training produces excellent obedience. Ours produces effective problem solvers." Over the following week, Erika and the other German prisoners observed a training regimen that systematically challenged their assumptions about military excellence. The physical fitness training emphasized functional strength and endurance over a ceremonial appearance. The American soldiers, who did not look as parade-ready as the Wehrmacht troops, demonstrated superior stamina during sustained operations. The weapons training taught the soldiers to understand the mechanical principles of their equipment rather than just the rote procedures for its operation. This meant that the American soldiers could maintain and repair their equipment in field conditions, where the Wehrmacht soldiers would have required the support of a specialist. The leadership training at every level emphasized initiative and problem solving. Even the private-rank soldiers received instruction in small unit tactics, because the American doctrine assumed that every soldier might need to take on a leadership role at some point. "It is a completely different philosophy," Monica observed during one of their evening discussions. "The Wehrmacht's training assumes that soldiers are like components in a machine, precision parts that function through perfect synchronization. The American training, on the other hand, assumes that soldiers are independent operators who can coordinate their actions toward a common goal." "And which philosophy produces better results in combat?" Bergman asked quietly. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Erika had been keeping detailed notes on the American training methods, initially with the intention of documenting their inadequacies for future intelligence purposes. But as the evidence mounted, her notes began to focus more and more on a comparison of the American and German approaches, and she found herself questioning the assumptions she had held throughout her entire military career. "Captain Williams," she said, approaching him after one particularly revealing training session, "may I ask you something of a personal nature?" "Of course." "Did you design your training to specifically counter the German methods, or were these approaches developed independently?" Williams considered the question for a moment. "American military training has evolved from our own national character and our combat experiences. We are a nation that was founded on the principles of individual initiative and democracy. Our military reflects those values. We trust our soldiers to think for themselves because that is how Americans naturally approach problems. It just so happens that this approach is very effective against armies that are built on a rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience, but that is almost a coincidence." "So, you are saying that the effectiveness of the American military comes from its cultural values, rather than from a deliberate tactical design?" "I am saying that our training works because it is authentic to who we are as a society. You cannot simply import another nation's military methods without also importing the cultural values that make those methods effective. The Wehrmacht's training produces perfect obedience because German culture values hierarchy and authority. American training produces initiative and problem-solving because those are the traits that we admire in our citizens." The explanation resonated uncomfortably with Erica's observations. She had been assuming that the American training was simply an inferior version of the German methods. But Williams was suggesting that they were fundamentally different approaches, based on different values, and that the American values might just produce more adaptable soldiers. 2 weeks into the training observation program, Colonel Morrison invited Erica to attend some of the officer development courses. There, American lieutenants and captains were learning a command philosophy that seemed designed to contradict everything she had been taught at the Wehrmacht's officer school. "The primary role of an American officer," instructed Major Patterson during a leadership seminar that Erica was permitted to observe, "is to develop capable subordinates who can function independently. Your success as a leader is measured not by how well your soldiers obey your orders, but by how effectively they can accomplish their missions when you are not present." The concept was revolutionary to Erica. In the Wehrmacht's officer training, success meant maintaining absolute control and ensuring the perfect execution of commands. The idea that an officer should deliberately foster independence in their subordinates seemed like an abdication of their command responsibility. "What happens when the soldiers disagree with the orders?" Erica asked during the question period, taking advantage of Morrison's permission to participate in the discussions. "It depends on the situation," Patterson replied. "In combat, orders are to be followed immediately, and any discussion will happen afterward if time permits. During planning and training, however, we encourage our soldiers to question any orders that they do not understand or believe to be flawed. Some of our best tactical innovations have come from enlisted men or junior officers who saw a better approach than their senior commanders had initially recognized. But that undermines the authority of the command," Erica protested. "Military effectiveness requires a hierarchical discipline and unquestioned obedience." "Does it?" Patterson asked mildly. "You are a captured Wehrmacht officer, Miss Weber. Your army emphasized hierarchical discipline and unquestioned obedience. How well did that serve Germany's military effectiveness?" The question was pointed but not hostile, delivered with the kind of directness that the Americans seemed to prefer over diplomatic subtlety. Erica had no good answer because the evidence was overwhelming. The German military's training had produced obedient soldiers, who had executed flawed orders with perfect precision, leading to strategic disasters that a bit of individual initiative might have prevented. "I've been thinking about your observations," Morrison told her after the seminar had concluded. "You have been taking detailed notes on our American training methods. Would you be willing to share your analysis? Not for intelligence purposes, of course. The war is effectively over, and this information is not a secret. But I am curious as to how a Wehrmacht officer perceives our approach to military training." Erica hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Over the next week, she compiled her observations into a comprehensive report that compared the American and Wehrmacht training philosophies. The process forced her to articulate the conclusions she had been trying to avoid. The American training produced soldiers who could adapt to unexpected situations. The Wehrmacht's training produced soldiers who could execute known procedures perfectly, but who struggled when the situation deviated from their plan. The American command structure distributed its decision-making authority broadly. The Wehrmacht structure concentrated its authority at the higher levels, creating bottlenecks when rapid decisions were needed. The American military culture valued the accomplishment of the mission over procedural correctness. The Wehrmacht's culture valued procedural correctness over improvisation, even when the circumstances demanded adaptation. "This is an excellent analysis," Morrison said after he had reviewed her report. "You have identified the key differences between our military cultures. But I notice you have avoided the most important question: which approach is more effective? You have described the differences without making any judgments about their relative merit." Erica stared at her report, recognizing that Morrison was right. She had documented the differences while avoiding the obvious conclusion that her own experience had proven. The American training philosophy had produced military forces that had defeated the German armies. Despite Germany's initial advantages in experience, equipment, and tactical doctrine. "The American approach is more effective," she said finally, the admission both painful and undeniable. The Wehrmacht's training produced soldiers who were superior in their parade ground precision and their synchronized movements. But the American training produced soldiers who were superior where it mattered, in their combat effectiveness, their adaptability, and their ability to accomplish the mission. "That is a difficult conclusion for a Wehrmacht officer to reach," Morrison observed with sympathy. "It is an impossible conclusion," Erica replied. "But the evidence does not care about my preferences or my national pride. I have watched your training for 3 weeks. I have seen American soldiers accomplish with initiative and adaptability what Wehrmacht soldiers could not achieve through perfect obedience. The comparison is not a flattering one for the German military culture, but denying it does not change the reality." Morrison studied her thoughtfully. "Miss Weber, would you be interested in helping us to develop training materials for the post-war German reconstruction? Your understanding of both the Wehrmacht and the American military cultures would make you a valuable asset in creating educational programs that could help the German people to understand alternative approaches to military organization." The offer surprised her, but Erica also recognized its wisdom. If Germany was to rebuild effectively, it needed to learn from the societies that had succeeded where the German methods had failed. That learning process would be more effective if it came from Germans who could bridge both cultures, rather than from Americans imposing unfamiliar concepts. "I will help," she decided. "But I want to be honest about what I am doing. I will not be pretending that the American methods are perfect, but I will explain why they are effective and how they might be adapted to the needs of a post-war Germany." "That is exactly what we need," Morrison replied. "An honest analysis that respects both cultures while recognizing that military training should be judged by its combat effectiveness rather than by its appearance on a parade." Around November 1944 brought news of Germany's increasingly desperate military situation and a growing recognition among the prisoners that the supposed superiority of the Wehrmacht had been nothing more than propaganda. For Erica, the training observations had crystallized into a painful understanding. The German military culture had valued the wrong things, prioritizing appearance over effectiveness, obedience over initiative, and a rigid adherence to procedure over adaptive problem-solving. "I have been asked to give a presentation," she told the assembled German prisoners during their evening discussion, "about what we have learned from observing the American military's training. Colonel Morrison wants me to explain our observations to the other prisoner groups and, eventually, to develop educational materials for a post-war Germany." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some of the prisoners saw it as a form of collaboration with the enemy. Others recognized it as a practical preparation for the post-war reconstruction. Monica spoke for the pragmatists. "We lost the war partly because we believed our own propaganda about our military superiority. If Erica's observations can help future Germans to avoid making the same mistakes, then that is a valuable service to our country." Over the next month, Erica delivered her presentations to multiple groups of prisoners, always emphasizing the same themes. The American military's training worked because it was aligned with American cultural values. The German training had failed because it had prioritized the wrong attributes. Any post-war reform of the German military would need to learn from the success of the Allies, without simply copying their foreign methods. The key lesson, she explained during one of her presentations, is not that the American methods are superior in absolute terms. It is that an effective military training program must be in harmony with the society it serves. The Americans trained for initiative because their culture valued individual problem-solving. The Germans trained for obedience because our culture valued a hierarchical authority. In modern combat, initiative proved to be more valuable than obedience. "So you are saying that German culture is inferior?" challenged one of the listeners, a former panzer officer who was still clinging to the mythology of the Wehrmacht. "I am saying that the German military culture made choices that proved to be ineffective in modern warfare," Erika replied carefully. "That is not the same as claiming an overall cultural inferiority. But it does mean that we need to honestly assess what worked and what did not, rather than clinging to the comfortable myths of our superiority." As 1944 came to a close and the Allied victory became inevitable, the American authorities began to implement comprehensive cultural education programs for the prisoners who would be returning to help rebuild Germany. Erika found herself at the center of these efforts, developing training materials that compared the different military philosophies and explained why the American approaches had proven to be so effective. "You have become quite influential," observed Captain Williams during one of their regular consultation meetings. "The prisoners respect your Wehrmacht credentials, but they also trust your analysis of the American methods. That combination makes you a valuable bridge between the two cultures." "I am just being honest about what I have observed," Erika replied. "The American training works because it produces soldiers who can think independently while still maintaining the cohesion of their unit. The Wehrmacht's training failed because it produced soldiers who could only function under the direct authority of a commander. Those are factual observations, not value judgments about our national character. But they are value judgments about military effectiveness," Williams pointed out. "And those judgments challenge the German mythology about the superiority of the Wehrmacht. Which is exactly why they need to be stated," Erika said firmly. "Germany lost the war partly because we believed our own propaganda. If my observations can help future Germans to recognize that military effectiveness requires adaptability over a rigid obedience, then that is worth whatever criticism I may receive from those who are still clinging to their defeated ideologies." In January 1945, as the final collapse of Germany accelerated, Erika received a formal assignment to the post-war military education program. She would remain in American custody, but she would be working as a civilian educator rather than a prisoner, teaching German civilians and military personnel about alternative approaches to military organization and training. "Your assignment will likely extend for several years," Morrison explained. "The post-war reconstruction of Germany will require an extensive re-education about its military culture and its civil-military relations. Your unique perspective as a Wehrmacht officer who understands both the German and the American approaches makes you an invaluable asset for that work." "I understand," Erika replied, "and I am ready to serve, even if some Germans will consider me a traitor for acknowledging that the American military's training proved to be superior to the methods of the Wehrmacht." "You are not acknowledging superiority," Morrison corrected her. "You are acknowledging effectiveness. There is an important difference. The American methods worked in the American context with American soldiers. The lesson for Germany is not to simply copy America, but to develop training approaches that value initiative and problem-solving while still remaining authentically German." As winter deepened and the end of the war drew near, Erika reflected on how completely her understanding had been transformed. 3 months ago, she had stood at a barracks window, mocking the American soldiers who did not move with the precision of the Wehrmacht. Now she understood that that very precision had been the problem, a rigid adherence to procedure when the circumstances demanded adaptation. The American soldiers she had initially dismissed as undisciplined farmers were, in fact, highly trained professionals, whose casual efficiency was a reflection of their confidence, not their sloppiness. Their training emphasized the attributes that truly mattered in combat: initiative, problem-solving, adaptability, and a focus on the mission. The Wehrmacht's training had emphasized the attributes that looked impressive on a parade ground, but that proved to be less valuable in actual warfare. Synchronized movements, unquestioning obedience, and a rigid adherence to procedure. Our men were not superior, she wrote in her journal that night. We were trained to value the wrong things, and it took becoming a prisoner, and watching the enemy soldiers trained to understand that military excellence is not measured by its precision on a parade ground, but by its effectiveness in combat. That is the lesson I will spend the next years of my life teaching to the German people, who need to understand that admitting to our past mistakes is the first step toward building a better future. March 1945 brought the collapse of Germany and the end of the war in Europe. But for Erika, it marked the beginning of a new mission. Her transition from a prisoner to an educator was formalized with a civilian employment contract from the U.S. Army's Military Government Division, where she was tasked with developing training programs for the post-war reconstruction of Germany. Your first assignment, explained Colonel Morrison, who was now overseeing the occupation planning, is to create educational materials that will explain the American military's training philosophy to the German officers who will be rebuilding their country's defense forces under Allied supervision. Erika understood the challenge immediately. The former Wehrmacht officers would be resistant to taking lessons from their victorious enemies, especially when those lessons contradicted their cherished beliefs about German military excellence. She would need to present the American methods not as superior alternatives, but as effective approaches that were worthy of study and adaptation. I want to emphasize a comparative analysis, she told Morrison during their planning sessions. Not that the American methods are better, but that this is what the Americans do differently, and this is why it works for them. Let the German officers draw their own conclusions from the evidence, rather than feeling as if they are being lectured about their failures. The approach proved to be effective when she began to teach her first classes in occupied Munich. The former Wehrmacht officers arrived skeptical and defensive, but Erika's credentials, as a decorated communications officer who had commanded respect in the German military, gave her a credibility that the American instructors could not match. I have stood where you are standing now, she told her first class of 40 German officers. I watched the American training and I thought it looked undisciplined and inferior. But I forced myself to observe it carefully and to question my own assumptions. What I learned challenged everything I had ever believed about military excellence. She walked them through the same observations she had made at Fort Leavenworth. The American emphasis on initiative over obedience, the distributed decision-making rather than a centralized control, and the focus on the mission instead of a rigid adherence to procedure. Each point was illustrated with specific examples that compared the Wehrmacht and American approaches. Consider a simple scenario, she proposed. A squad encounters an unexpected enemy position during an advance. The Wehrmacht's training says to report to the command, await new orders, and then execute the modified plan. The American training says the squad leader assesses the situation, makes an immediate tactical decision, and adapts without waiting for a higher authority. Which approach is more effective in a fluid combat situation? The Wehrmacht's approach maintains the control of the command, argued Major Hoffmann, a former panzer officer who was still loyal to the traditional German military doctrine. Without central coordination, the units would operate independently and lose their overall strategic coherence. Does maintaining control matter if it means losing tactical opportunities? Erika countered. The Americans defeated us partly because their soldiers could adapt faster than our command structure could issue new orders. We valued control over effectiveness, and we paid the price for that choice. The discussions were heated but productive. The former Wehrmacht officers wrestled with the uncomfortable truths about military effectiveness, gradually recognizing that their defeat had not been the result of a lack of courage or inferior soldiers, but of a training philosophy that had prioritized the wrong attributes for modern warfare. You are making them question everything, observed Captain Williams, who had been transferred to occupation duty and who occasionally attended Erika's classes. That is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. It is what I had to do, Erika replied. To question everything I thought I knew about military excellence. If they are willing to undergo the same process, then we can build something better than what failed so catastrophically. Over the following months, Erika's reputation grew among both the occupation authorities and the German military personnel. She became known as the Wehrmacht officer, who could honestly assess Germany's failures without losing her respect for its soldiers, who could explain America's success without claiming that the Americans were inherently superior. The key, she explained during one particularly successful class, is to recognize that a military's training must be in alignment with its national culture and the realities of combat. The Americans trained for initiative because their culture valued individual problem-solving. The Germans trained for obedience because our culture valued hierarchy. Neither is inherently right or wrong, but in modern warfare, adaptability proved to be more valuable than a rigid adherence to procedure. That is the lesson we need to internalize. As 1945 came to a close and the occupation deepened, Erica's work expanded beyond military training to include broader questions about civil-military relations and democratic governance. But her core message remained consistent. An honest assessment of past failures was essential for building a better future, and learning from former enemies required setting aside one's pride to acknowledge what they had done more effectively. The winter of 1946 brought new challenges. As the tensions of the Cold War began to emerge, and the American authorities recognized that the reconstruction of the German military would need to be aimed at countering Soviet influence, rather than simply preventing a German rearmament. Erica found herself at the center of the debates about how to build a new German defense force that could learn from the failures of the Wehrmacht while avoiding a complete Americanization. We need German officers who can think independently, but who can also operate within a democratic framework, explained General Matthews, the senior American officer who was overseeing the military's reconstruction planning. Your training programs need to prepare them for that balance of initiative and problem-solving, without the authoritarianism that characterized the Wehrmacht's culture. The task was a delicate one. Too much emphasis on the American methods would create resistance from the German officers, who would see it as a form of cultural imperialism. Too little emphasis would risk recreating the hierarchical rigidity that had contributed to the failures of the Wehrmacht. Erica worked to find a middle ground that would respect the German military's traditions, while also incorporating the lessons learned from America's effectiveness. I have been developing a concept that I call mission-type tactics with democratic accountability, she explained during a presentation to a group of senior American and German officials. It combines the German military's tradition of Auftragstactik, mission type, orders that give subordinates the freedom to accomplish their objectives, with the American emphasis on initiative and democratic civilian control. The concept resonated with both audiences. The German officers appreciated the references to their traditional Auftragstaktik doctrine, which had actually emphasized subordinate initiative before it had been corrupted by the authoritarianism of the Nazi era. The American officials appreciated the framework of democratic accountability, which would prevent the military's independence from threatening the civilian government. This is an excellent synthesis, commented Brigadier General Weber, no relation, a former Wehrmacht officer who was now working with the occupation authorities. You have taken the best of both traditions and created something that might actually work for a post-war Germany. But the implementation proved to be challenging. The former Wehrmacht officers struggled to abandon their ingrained habits of a rigid hierarchy. The younger Germans, who were disillusioned by the militarism of the Nazi era, resisted any form of military training that seemed authoritarian. Erica found herself constantly adapting her approach to suit the different audiences, always emphasizing the same core message, that an effective military training program requires a balance of discipline and initiative, of order and adaptability. Some days I feel like I'm trying to teach cats to swim, she confided to Monica, who had joined her educational staff after proving to be equally effective at bridging the German and American military cultures. The Wehrmacht veterans want to maintain a rigid hierarchy, and the young Germans reject anything that reminds them of the Nazi militarism. Finding a middle ground that can satisfy both is nearly impossible. But it is necessary, Monica replied. Germany needs a military force that can defend its democracy without threatening it. That requires exactly the kind of balance you are trying to teach. Discipline without authoritarianism, and initiative without chaos. By the end of 1946, Erica's training programs had educated over 500 former Wehrmacht officers in the new approaches to military leadership. The feedback suggested that the programs were effective, with the participants reporting that they had gained valuable insights into why the American military's methods worked and how similar principles might be adapted to the German context. "Your work has been more influential than we had initially hoped," Morrison told her during a review meeting. "Multiple Allied nations are requesting copies of your training materials for their own occupation zones. You have become the primary voice in explaining how to reform the German military's culture without destroying what was valuable in its traditions." The recognition was gratifying, but it was also overwhelming. Erica had started this journey as a prisoner, mocking the American training. Now she was an internationally recognized expert on military cultural reform. The transformation felt surreal, yet it was a reflection of the broader transformations that Germany itself was undergoing. From a defeated enemy to a potential ally, from an authoritarian militarism to a democratic governance. "I am just being honest about what I have observed," she replied to Morrison's praise. "The American training worked because it was aligned with American values and the realities of combat. The German training failed because it prioritized appearance over effectiveness. The lesson is not a complicated one. Militaries succeed when their training is in harmony with their cultural values and their tactical requirements. Germany's challenge is to develop a form of training that can serve its democratic values while still maintaining its military effectiveness." As 1946 came to a close, Erica received an official appointment as a senior consultant to the Allied High Commission's Military Training Division, a position that would allow her to shape the reconstruction of the German military for years to come. The former Wehrmacht officer who had mocked the American soldiers had become the architect of a new German military culture, based partly on the lessons she had learned from those very same American soldiers she had once dismissed as inferior. In the summer of 1955, 10 years after the end of the war, Erica stood at the newly established Bundeswehr training facility near Munich, watching the first generation of post-war German soldiers conduct exercises that blended the German military's traditions with the lessons learned from America's effectiveness. The young soldiers moved with a sense of purpose and discipline, but their training emphasized initiative and problem-solving rather than a rigid obedience. "Impressive," commented General Taylor, who was visiting from the U.S. Army headquarters to observe the training that Erica had helped to design. "They look professional and disciplined, but you can see the difference from the old Wehrmacht style. These soldiers are being trained to think, not just to obey." "That was always the goal," Erica replied, watching a squad leader make an independent tactical decision during a training scenario, to create a military force that combines the German tradition with the American lessons about adaptability and initiative. "It has taken a decade, but I think we are finally achieving that balance." The Bundeswehr's training program represented everything that Erica had learned since that morning in 1944 when she had stood at a barracks window, mocking the American soldiers. The new German military emphasized democratic values, civilian control and individual initiative, while still maintaining the discipline and professional standards that were valued in the German military tradition. "Do you ever regret it?" asked Monica, who was now a senior training administrator and who had traveled with Erica to observe the graduation exercises. "Spending 10 years teaching the German people to adopt methods that you once mocked?" "Never," Erica replied firmly. "I regret the years I wasted believing the Wehrmacht's propaganda about our superiority. But I do not regret the decade I have spent helping Germany to learn from its mistakes." The graduation ceremony that afternoon featured addresses from both German and Allied officials, all of whom emphasized the same themes: democratic values, military professionalism, and the importance of learning from past failures. When Erica was called to the stage to receive recognition for her contributions to the military's reconstruction, she felt an overwhelming sense of emotion at how far Germany had come. 10 years ago, she told the assembled soldiers and officials, "I was a Wehrmacht officer who believed that German military training was superior to anything our enemies could produce. I mocked the American soldiers because they did not move with a parade ground precision, because they questioned their orders, and because they valued initiative over obedience." She paused, looking out at the young German soldiers who had grown up in a very different Germany from the one she had served. "It took becoming a prisoner and watching the American training with open eyes to understand that I had been wrong about what constituted military excellence. The Wehrmacht's training produced soldiers who looked impressive on a parade ground, but who struggled when combat required adaptation. The American training produced soldiers who looked casual, but who proved to be devastatingly effective when the circumstances demanded independent problem-solving. The lesson I learned, the lesson I have spent 10 years teaching, is that an effective military training program must serve the actual requirements of combat, rather than satisfying our aesthetic preferences for synchronized movements and unquestioning obedience. Modern warfare rewards initiative, adaptability, and a distributed decision-making process. The Bundeswehr you are joining has been built on those principles, combining the best of the German military's tradition with the lessons learned from studying why our enemies succeeded where we had failed. As the ceremony concluded and the young soldiers dispersed to their first assignments, Erika reflected on her improbable journey from a prisoner to the architect of Germany's military reconstruction. The transformation had required her to set aside her pride, to acknowledge some painful truths, and to recognize that learning from former enemies was a patriotic service rather than a betrayal. "Any final thoughts?" asked Colonel Morrison, who had traveled from Washington to attend the ceremony. He had become a friend over the years, someone who understood both the difficulty and the importance of the work Erika had undertaken. "Just gratitude," Erika replied, watching the Bundeswehr soldiers conduct themselves with a professional discipline that honored the German traditions while also embracing democratic values. "Gratitude that I was captured by a people who were generous enough to teach, rather than to simply punish. That I was forced to observe a form of training that challenged my assumptions. That I was given the opportunity to help build something better than what had failed so catastrophically." As evening approached and the ceremonies came to a close, Erika took a final walk through the training facility that represented a decade of her work and her own transformation. The young German soldiers she passed looked confident and capable, trained in methods that would have been revolutionary in the Wehrmacht's culture, but that had become the norm in Germany's democratic military service. "Our men were never superior," she murmured, remembering her arrogant declarations from that first day at Fort Leavenworth. "We just believed our own propaganda and paid a terrible price for that self-deception." The real superiority came from the Americans, who were secure enough in their own methods to let their enemy prisoners observe them carefully, confident that an honest observation would reveal their effectiveness. The greatest victory, she had learned, was not a military conquest, but the transformation of understanding that came from setting aside one's prejudice long enough to recognize that former enemies might have valuable lessons to teach. And the strongest military forces were those that valued effectiveness over appearance, substance over ceremony, and the courage to admit when their most cherished beliefs had been proven wrong. As she drove away from the training facility towards her home in Munich, Erika felt a sense of pride in what the reconstruction of the German military had achieved. Not because it had copied the American methods, but because it had learned from America's success while creating something that was authentically German and genuinely democratic. A military that could defend without threatening, that valued initiative without abandoning discipline, and that recognized that true excellence comes from adaptability, rather than a rigid adherence to procedure. The American soldiers she had once mocked had taught her the most valuable lesson of all. That strength comes not from never being wrong, but from having the courage to recognize one's mistakes, and to learn from those who had succeeded where you